My name is Juliet Anderson, and I am 28 years old. And the first time my father called me a liar, I was 7, standing at a crowded table during my aunt's birthday dinner with sticky juice on my hands and a glass tipped over in front of me. And when I said it slipped, because it had, he didn't look at me. He looked at everyone else and said, "She always says that, never her fault." And they laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly. Just enough for something inside me to settle into place. Something quiet and permanent. The understanding that no matter what I said, I had already been decided, already defined. And for the next 21 years, I tried to outrun that definition. I learned how to speak carefully, how to apologize before anyone asked, how to make myself smaller in conversations so no one would feel the need to correct me. I adjusted my tone, my posture, my opinions. I built a version of myself that was acceptable, agreeable, easier to defend, hoping that one day they would look at me and see someone worth believing. But the finish line kept moving. And then I met Callum Reed. He was 31, a civil engineer with steady hands and a kind of quiet that didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. We met at a rooftop fundraiser 3 years ago. Neither of us was supposed to be there for long. And within 4 minutes, he spilled a drink on my jacket, and he apologized so sincerely, so completely, that instead of bracing myself, I laughed. And something about that moment felt unfamiliar in the best way, like exhaling after holding your breath for years without realizing it. We talked for the rest of the night, not in that performative way people do at events, but in a way that made time feel irrelevant. And when we exchanged numbers, it didn't feel like a risk, it felt like a continuation. He didn't need me to shrink. He didn't rush my answers. He asked questions and waited, really waited. And when I was direct, he didn't pull back. He leaned in, and after 14 months, he proposed in our kitchen. No audience, no spectacle. Just him on one knee with his grandmother's ring, and his voice catching slightly when he said my name. And I said yes before he could even finish, because for the first time in my life, being chosen didn't feel conditional. We set the wedding for a Saturday in late September, with a rehearsal dinner the Friday before at a place called Brennan's. Candles, close friends, something warm and simple, the kind of evening I had imagined for years without ever fully believing I would have. And my parents never liked Callum. My father thought he wasn't impressive enough, too quiet, too measured, like he didn't perform success in the way my father respected, and my mother smiled at him when he was present and dismantled him the moment he wasn't. But by then I had learned how to filter them, how to let their words pass through me without settling, or at least I thought I had, until 14 days before my wedding, when they did something I could not filter. Callum called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and his voice was careful, not angry, not distant, just careful in a way that told me something had shifted. He said my parents had come to his office unannounced, sat across from him, and told him that when I was 22, I had been pregnant, that I had given birth, and that I had abandoned the child. Walked away without looking back. My father used the word bastard. My mother leaned in like she was sharing something important and said, "Don't let her trap you too." And Callum didn't accuse me. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked if there was anything I needed to tell him. And I sat in my car in a parking garage with my phone pressed to my ear and felt something inside me drop out completely because there had been a pregnancy. But nothing about what they said was true. When I was 22, I was in a relationship with a man named Sebastian Cole. Older, charming in a way that disguised control as confidence. And when I got pregnant, I was terrified, not just of the situation, but of how small he made my choices feel. He didn't want the child. And every time I tried to think out loud about what I wanted, he reduced it, minimized it, until I felt like I was standing on something that kept shrinking beneath me. And I carried that pregnancy for 4 months before a miscarriage ended it suddenly, painfully, completely out of my hands. There was no birth, no baby. I walked away from, just grief that I buried so deeply I barely let myself acknowledge it. And I never told Callum, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't know how to reopen something I had worked so hard to survive. And my parents knew the truth. My mother had driven me to the hospital. She had held my hand in the waiting room. She knew exactly what had happened and exactly what had not. And still, 2 weeks before my wedding, she chose to sit across from the man I was going to marry and rewrite my life in the most damaging way she could. I went to Callum that night and told him everything: the relationship, the pregnancy, the miscarriage, the silence. And he listened without interrupting, without shifting away. And when I finished, he reached for my hand and said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. Not why didn't you tell me? Not how do I know this is true? Just I'm sorry." And in that moment, I knew exactly who he was. But I also knew that what my parents had done wouldn't just disappear, because doubt doesn't need proof to exist. It just needs proximity. And they had placed it as close to our wedding as possible, like they were hoping it would fracture something quietly, and maybe it would have. If not for what happened at the rehearsal dinner, Brennan's was exactly how I had imagined. Warm light, soft voices, everything calm in that fragile way. Moments are when they feel almost too good to trust. Callum stood near the bar, glancing at me every few minutes like he always did. Like he was checking that I was still there. And for a moment, I almost believed we had made it through the worst of it, that maybe nothing else would happen. My parents were seated at the far end of the table, composed, polite, performing normalcy. And I hadn't uninvited them because I didn't know how to create that kind of conflict so close to the wedding. And some part of me still hoped they would just let the evening pass. That hope lasted until exactly 8:17 when the door opened. And Nora Voss walked in, someone I hadn't seen in 6 years, someone who had known me during the hardest period of my life, who had sat with me through the aftermath of the miscarriage when I didn't have words for it. We hadn't drifted apart because of anything dramatic, just distance, time, the kind of separation that happens when two people are tied to a shared pain they no longer want to revisit. And I hadn't invited her. So when I saw her standing there holding a manila envelope, looking directly at me with a steadiness that didn't leave room for small talk, I knew immediately that this wasn't a coincidence. She came straight to me, said my name, and asked for 5 minutes. And something in her voice made it clear that whatever she had brought couldn't wait. We stepped into the corridor outside the dining room, and she handed me the envelope and told me to open it. Inside were medical records from the hospital, dated, official, documenting the miscarriage at 17 weeks, a physician's letter confirming the loss, and beneath that, printed screenshots of messages between my mother and Sebastian, time-stamped from 3 months earlier, in which my mother had reached out asking him to confirm that I had given birth to a living child and given it up for adoption. And Sebastian, to his credit, refused. He said that wasn't true, that he wouldn't support that version of events. And my mother pushed again and again until he stopped responding, and Nora told me he had contacted her because the messages made him uneasy. And she had driven for hours to bring me proof before I walked into a marriage with something like that hanging over it. And I stood there holding those papers, feeling something shift that wasn't explosive, it wasn't rage, it was quieter, heavier. The realization that this wasn't misunderstanding or fear or misguided protection. It was intentional, it was planned, and it had nothing to do with me as a person and everything to do with control. And when I walked back into the dining room, Callum saw it in my face before I said anything and came to stand beside me. And I placed the envelope on the table in front of my parents, in front of everyone. And I didn't raise my voice because I didn't need to anymore. I explained what the documents were, what they had done, when they had done it, and why. And the room went completely still. My father's expression tightened. My mother looked down, and neither of them denied it. And I asked them to leave, just that, nothing more. And they did, without a scene, without a defense. And for a moment there was silence. And then Callum's mother stood up and began to clap, slowly at first, and then others joined. And I stood there in that room, in that light, with evidence in front of me and support around me. And for the first time I felt something settle in a way it never had before. Like the version of me that had been questioned for so long was finally allowed to exist without interruption. We got married the next day, a small ceremony, honest, uncomplicated. My parents weren't there, and it didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something resolved. Callum cried during his vows. I cried during mine. Nora sat in the front row and handed me a tissue at exactly the moment I needed it. And as I stood there, I realized that I had spent most of my life trying to earn a kind of love that was never going to be given in the way I needed, and that walking away from that wasn't loss, it was clarity. And now, when I think about that moment when I was 7 years old, standing at that table being called a liar, I don't feel the same weight I used to. Because that story didn't end there. It just took me years to reach the part where I stopped asking to be believed and started choosing where I stood instead.